Okay, Anthony, so for this lesson, what you're going to be doing is going over a very quick overview of what is called sectionalism. So sectionalism is this idea that the country starts to kind of not officially divide itself, but it does begin to have three very distinct regions on a whole bunch of different levels, their economy, some of their culture parts, things like that. And so we'll get into this more later in this semester, but it's important for you to have a sort of general understanding of it, because understanding what's happening in these three regions will help you to understand some of the other events and things that come up as we continue to move forward in U.S. history. So again, today is just a very brief sort of surface level overview of the three regions or three sections. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take the notes you have there and you're simply just going to follow along and get things taken care of. Now, there's going to be some instructions for you on the various slides. What you need to do is make sure you pause the video whenever you need to make sure you get the notes copied or a task completed. Okay, so here we go. So the first thing is, what you're going to need to do is you'll see a map there in the middle of your notes page, and you're just going to need to label it just like it is here, label and color. Now the colors you use, that's totally up to you. You don't have to use the ones that you see here on the slide, but you do want 3 different colors, and you definitely want to use colored pencils because marker will be hard to see when you label north, south, and west. Now if you want to put the west, the north, or the south, or just simply put north, south, and west, it's totally up to you. Okay, so again, go ahead, take a moment, pause the video, make sure you have your 3 different colored pencils, 3 different colors. Go ahead and color in each one of these sections, and again, label it, either label the west, the north, and the south. Okay, now that you've got your map labeled, what you're going to do is above the map, right up here, okay, kind of above the map, see where it says write term and definition above the map, okay, and your term here is sectionalism. So the full definition of sectionalism is disagreements between the different regions, north, south, and west. So on your map, you're just going to write sectionalism and then write that above, make sure you keep it above the map, because we're going to be putting notes to either side of the map and below it. So you want to make sure you write it nice and neat right there above it. Okay, because again, remember, you pause the video long enough for you to get this taken care of. Okay, so the first section that you're going to write some notes on is the north. So you're going to write that on the right-hand side of the map. And yeah, there's quite a bit here, so make sure that you are writing nice and neat. If you need to, you can use the back of the map, you know, the other side of the paper, if that's going to be easier for you, to make sure you get all of the north notes together. Okay, so if you're looking at it going, man, I don't know that I can get all this on the right-hand side of the map, just simply turn your map over and write the north, and then start writing this down. So then, all right, so you're just going to copy down these bullet points. I'm going to talk to you about them, so you can start copying them down as I'm talking. And when I'm done with this slide, again, if you need to pause the video to continue to get all the notes, make sure you do that. Okay, so the man pictured here on the slide, that is Mr. Daniel Webster. And he represented the North. He's sort of, if there's one person that's representative of the views of the North, it would be Daniel Webster. And he's a politician from Massachusetts, which is a northern state. Now, he is against slavery spreading west. Okay, now it is important to remember that this is not saying that he is 100% against slavery, though many in the North become very much against slavery. Their main focus in the time period that we're in U.S. history is to stop it from spreading to the west. Also in the North, they supported what's called internal improvements. So this would be things like roads, railroads eventually, what those canals, which are man-made, kind of like a man-made river, and really it's about who pays for them. So the North was all about having the government pay for these things. Remember, the North is far more industrial. They have much more into manufacturing because remember the those New England colonies especially, they had terrible soil, so and harsh winters, so they didn't develop very much agriculture. So they were emphasis on trade, and eventually this leads to manufacturing, and eventually we'll take a look at this leads to actual industrialization. That's why you see a picture of some factories and stuff here. Okay, so those internal improvements would have helped them to be able to sell their stuff. Okay, to get it to different places, in particular, selling it to the West. So as the country moves west and crosses the Appalachian Mountains and crosses Louisiana Purchase land and all those things, well now they want to sell the stuff they're making to Americans in the West. Well, to do that, they're all about roads and canals and all those kinds of things. And so this is just an economically driven desire here. Now, they also would have been supportive of a strong federal government. So this would make them more likely to be a political party called the Federalist. So again, to help you remember that, you want to think Federalist and a strong federal government. Now, the federal government is the national government, okay? Also, going along with this means they were supportive of a national bank. Those two definitely go together. Supporting a strong federal government and supporting a national bank are federalist positions, and they go hand in hand. They go together, really. Now, also, because they are much more about manufacturing, they're supportive of what's called a protective tariff. Now, a tariff is a tax on an imported good. So if it's coming from another country, it's an import. And so they wanted to have a tax on it called a tariff. The reason for this is that they believe that if you put a protective tariff on these items, then people would be more likely to buy it, something made in the country, because now it's the cheaper of the two options. So they want what's called a protective or a high protective tariff. Okay, and this is going to be important to note because tariffs actually, I know it sounds boring, but taxes are a big deal. As you learned about the beginning of the American Revolution, much of the anger of the colonists was about taxes. Well, here what you have is you have people that really disagree with one another over tariffs, and in fact, some of the first states some of the first southern states who look to leave the Union are do so during President Jackson's era over a tariff. All right, Anthony, so if you don't have all these copied yet, please go and make sure you pause the video, get that done before you move on. All right, so here we have the South. So again, this is where you would want to look to write under the map if you can. If not, again, make sure you keep all your South notes together on the other side of the paper. Okay, so the man pictured here on the right-hand side, that is Mr. John C. Calhoun. So he would be the man who is sort of a representative of Southern views, or the South region. And so he is definitely pro-slavery and its extension to the West. Now remember, the North was against slavery's expansion to the West, and of course the South is wanting it to expand. The South, you would also see as more supportive of what's called states' rights. States' rights is this idea that the states they're the ones who make decisions. And the power, really, more power should fall with the state government as opposed to the federal government. And so, if a state, for example, wants to have slavery, then a state ought to be able to do that without interference from the federal government. Now, again, this is something you'll hear more and more about as we get closer and closer to the Civil War. Okay, And it's not just over slavery that the states' rights issue comes up. Again, you'll see it over tariffs, you see it over slavery, you see it over a number of different issues. And in fact, it is something that's still argued about today. What is the role of these states and their powers, and what's the role and powers of the federal government? Now, the South is anti-tariff. They didn't want any kinds of tariffs on those imported goods. The reason for them is because they saw it as increasing their prices. Because the South is agricultural, and so they're selling a lot of raw materials, and then they're buying back the finished goods. So if they can get it wherever they can get it cheaper, that's where they want to get it. And by placing a tariff, particularly a high protective tariff, on those goods, their costs go up, and they certainly don't want to do that. Okay, so again, the North and the South pretty much disagree on everything of these major issues, both from, you go from the role of the federal government all the way to tariffs, to slavery. They disagree at just basically every point along the way. Okay, so again, make sure you get all these notes copied down, and go ahead and pause the video if you need to. And next up, what we have here, the West. Now, ideally, you'll go ahead and write this on the left-hand side of the map. Okay, but again, make sure you're keeping all the West notes together. So the West is represented by the man Henry Clay, and he is Speaker of the House. Now, Henry Clay's name is going to come up quite a bit during this time period. He becomes very active in as far as doing what's called compromises and working things out. He's also what was called one of the war hawks in pushing the United States to war in the War of 1812. And so he has quite a bit of influence for quite a while, actually, in U.S. history. Now, you'll notice it says, see it's underlined, he's open to slavery. So you have the North, who's against its expansion. You have the South, which is for slavery and its expansion. And then there's the West. So the West, many people in the West didn't have an opinion either way on slavery. Particularly leaders saw it as a way to leverage and get things they wanted. So for example, they might be willing to have slavery in an area if that meant they got something else they really wanted, like roads, for example. Things like that. Now, Henry Clay is supportive of the National Bank of a tariff. The term typically used is called a reasonable tariff. So it sort of splits the difference between the South, which is like no tariff, and the North, who's like high tariff. This is sort of what you might think of as a middle of the road, or they would call it a reasonable tariff. Okay, and very much depending on where you are in the West, the level of support you would have had for internal improvements may change. But in general, they are supportive of them because for them, that's how they're getting stuff from the East. From their perspective, at least the East. And not East isn't a region, but that's how they're getting any kind of goods to them, whether it be food or manufactured goods or whatever it is, finished products. They're getting them because of those internal improvements. So the more roads and the more eventually railroads, things like that there are, the better it is for them. All right, so these are your three regions.